All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, I'll just explain a little bit how the webinar works for those of you that haven't been on one before. All of you are muted. If you want to ask a question in your control panel, you can type that, and then I will relay those questions to Howard. And he has set some time aside in his presentation to do that towards the end. So you can ask it, and then we'll get to it at the end. Or if you want to wait to ask them towards the end, that works too. So with that, today we have Howard Coleman from MCA Associates leading this webinar. Howard is a guru in all things warehouse. As I'm sure many of you have heard, Howard guided CPS in reorganizing their central warehouse to maximize efficiency. And we have Mike Wishmeyer from CPS that he will actually be talking a little bit about this and giving some more detail on it. And with that, I will turn the time over to Howard. So, all right, Howard.
Well, thank you very much, Jordan, for that kind introduction. And I guess this is probably as good a time as any to thank the folks at Virtual Rain for expanding some of the time available we have today, so we could make this webinar as comprehensive as possible. So you can expect we may be running maybe as much as 15 minutes over what was originally advertised. But I hope you'll conclude that the few extra minutes were well spent. Again, my name is Howard Coleman. I'm a principal of MCA Associates. We're a management consulting firm and have been since 1986. And we work with both wholesale distributors and manufacturing companies as our clients, and clients who are committed to operational excellence. As Jordan mentioned, I have a co-conspirator with me today. I'm sure many of you know Mike Wishmeyer. He's CFO at CPS Distributors in Westminster, Colorado. And as Jordan mentioned, and for purposes of full disclosure, we have MCA Associates has had a previous client relationship with CPS Distributors. Now, Mike's experiences in working on some of the topics that we're going to be describing today, I think, should be invaluable. As well as describing maybe some of the, I like to call them mental hurdles that sometimes get encountered when you're dealing with new things. So I think Mike will act as a way, as a conduit, if you will, as a way to reinforce some of the concepts that we have to present today. My overriding objective today is to try to form a very clear distinction in terms of how you approach your distribution operations. And that is that unless you bring your distribution operations into the financial arena, then there's probably very little financial impetus for change. And we're going to suggest today that we can do this by increasing the velocity of the flow through your warehouse, what I commonly call speed of flow, and you'll hear that term used several times today, and how we can go about attacking what I'm broadly going to call waste. Now, from my own experience, over close to 30 years, frequently I've observed a certain degree of, I guess maybe the best way to describe it is a stepchild approach to distribution centers and warehouses. It's all that stuff that gets done back there. Sometimes it's under severe constraints. Maybe it's space, obsolete storage methods, sometimes outdated receiving and picking methods, or maybe it's an absence of or an underutilization of technology. So I would ask you to think about it this way, particularly if your company has growth aspirations. Maybe you need to think more about being able to expand the number of shipments you can make. Maybe you need more picking slots and a better way to store inventory. Maybe the purpose of your DC or warehouse has changed. Its design maybe in need of change also. And this is particularly true if you're forging ahead with any e-commerce initiatives. So after today, I'm going to urge you or someone from your company to really be focusing on this, because I think it's that important. We need to seek out every dollar per square foot of efficiency from our warehouse facilities. We need to increase that speed of flow so that every function within the warehouse provides absolute value-added space and that people utilization is optimized. We need to do a lot less walking around the warehouse. We're going to put a lot of emphasis on that today. And we need to drive distribution transaction costs down so we can create greater sales and customer satisfaction and more room for profit and have warehouses be a profit contributor. So I'm going to ask you to begin by looking at these two pictures and think about reimagining and transforming from something on the left side, if you will, to something that represents or is illustrated by the picture on the right side, where we can begin to generate some speed of flow in our facilities. Now, I can tell you, there are some key forces that are driving change in warehousing and distribution today. Managers I find, are being tasked to reduce costs in their existing operations, even in anticipation of a drive for increased sales. Most managers tell me they want new methods and technology to gain productivity opportunities, even though I can tell you for a fact that many underestimate the value of looking at their workflow detail. That is, all the steps they take to help achieve the savings now and to be able to avoid in the future costs. In other words, they're not sufficiently looking for good places to remove bottlenecks and constraints, that waste. But there are some things that worry me. There is some resistance to change that still exists. And I'm not talking about the traditional resistance to change that has to do with, well, you know, this is the way we've always done things. I'm not really interested in doing things differently. The resistance to change out there is really something different today. Distributors seem to have several initiatives, lots of different initiatives going on in terms of business improvement. They're focusing on what I like to call the more likable and friendly topics. Things like strategies to increase sales. Maybe it has to do with selling price optimization as a way of positively impacting their gross margins. And more recently, everyone's jumping on e-commerce applications. So my fear is that the improvements and gains they make in these more likable and friendly topic areas will somehow get whittled away by unnecessary costs in the warehouse. In other words, at the back end. So it worries me, maybe it makes me a tad pessimistic. I can tell you also that many wholesale distributors have let technology pass by, or maybe they've only marginally embraced it in the face of national competitors, regional competitors, e-commerce competitors, etc. And what really worries me is that this may be the last chance for many wholesale distributors that have historically kicked this can down the road. Those who maybe have hit the wall on productivity, those who may possess some layer of warehouse management system tools that they either don't use or have not been able to scale sufficiently. So particularly if your company has growth aspirations, it's going to be important that you be able to answer some questions. Will you be able to handle a projected increase in sales with the same warehouse workforce? Will you be able to add throughput capacity without adding substantial resources? Because answering these questions will ultimately be your roadmap to avoiding future costs. So I know everyone's pretty familiar with the traditional functionalities that exist within a distribution center or a warehouse. You know, it's receiving and put away and picking and cycle counting. It's verifying and packing merchandise before it goes out the door or before it gets loaded onto a truck and ultimately gets delivered. But I want to have you think about this differently. What if you woke up one morning and you had this epiphany? And you said, yeah, I want to be in the wholesale distribution business. I want to take orders. I want to arrange to get them shipped. I want to send out an invoice, and I want to collect money. What if you woke up that morning and you said, what if distribution operations and all the functions you internally now provide. Some of you may know this as people, the people that do this type of stuff are called third-party logistics providers. I'm not suggesting you do it, but I'm asking you to consider a different way of thinking. So what if you said, you know, can I outsource this to someone else? Well, how much do you think you would have to pay for it? And I guess this begs the question, do you know what your current costs are now? How much would you want to pay someone else to do it? I think that's even a better question. Now, again, I offer this thought exercise only as a way to start thinking like a third-party logistics provider would, because they operate as a profit center. They are a contributor to the profits of their company, rather than being considered as a pure cost center. And unfortunately, most DCs and warehouses and wholesale distribution that I encounter are just not run that way. So I think there's a process here we have to go through. I like to call it a process of discovering and learning, which poses more questions, still more questions. Will you be able to answer, and how will you answer these questions? How will you go about uncovering the barriers and the bottlenecks in your processes, your people, and your systems? What are you going to have to do to learn more about employing best practices, how to get a handle on costs, and providing results in reasonable performance metrics? Part of this uncovering of the barriers, which again I've been calling waste, is understanding the difference between value-added activities and non-value-added activities. Value-added activities cost us time, cost us money, but it adds value to the customer, something the customer expects and is really paying for. It's valuable to them. And then we have the non-value-added activities, the waste. Some of it is obvious waste. It still costs us time, it still costs us money, but it adds no value, and the customer really doesn't want to pay for it. So one might ask the question, is there some kind of perfectly designed warehouse or perfectly designed warehouse process? Well, I'm not sure I'm one who necessarily believes in perfection, although I know some of us may strive for it. But it seems to me that we should want to streamline our processes, and the major reason being we want to provide a consistent expected outcome, a consistent expected result by doing the right things and doing those things right. In other words, doing those things correctly. So I've kind of taken, admittedly here, a kind of circuitous way of getting us to our agenda today in terms of how we go about transforming into this agenda content. So today we're going to focus on understanding wastes in your processes, what's often called a lean thinking approach. I'm going to suggest 4 strategy components to be able to reach a goal of speed of flow. I'm going to make some suggestions for you today about things I think you should be thinking about, or at least rethinking, which involve 10 common warehouse observations that I've made over the years. And lastly, I'm going to suggest some good places to start that employ the concept of speed of flow, enhance our ability to increase our space utilization, our overall performance, the metrics we use, and ultimately, if we do have growth aspirations, how do we avoid future costs? So strategy component number 1, how do we become a lean thinker? Now we do, MCA Associates does a 1 and a 2-day workshop, on-site workshop on the whole concept of lean. We're not going to be spending obviously that much time on it today, although it is the first strategy component, so no one should expect to get a diploma today or some type of certificate. But what is lean thinking? Well, let me tell you what the misconceptions are first. It has nothing to do about going on some type of financial diet. It's not about starving your company of resources. It's not about reducing headcounts as much as people say it is. It's not about reducing capital investment, and it's not about some type of across-the-board inventory reduction program. It's really about a change in thinking. It's really more about changing your eating habits. In other words, how you consume the resources that you have available in your warehouse. And finally, overall, it's an ongoing commitment to continuous improvement rather than some flavor of the month program that's introduced every month. It's all about breaking down the barriers to improvement in your warehouse by identifying and eliminating bottlenecks, constraints, the obstacles. We all have them. We have to admit that we have them. It's waste. It's about driving to the root cause of a problem, not just treating symptoms. It's an emphasis on continually seizing new opportunities for improvement. Again, not some just one-time event. And it's a very optimistic view because it says that all barriers can ultimately be eliminated to everyone's satisfaction. Now, waste is everywhere in your organization. This is, for a wholesale distributor at least, a typical value, what's commonly called the value stream. Now, although we're going to be focusing on warehousing and distribution today, waste exists within all these types of functionalities within your organization. Now, I don't want to scare you with this picture, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but this is generally what's called a process map. And we sometimes do that as part of our analysis of a company because we want to better understand the processes, and we want to make sure companies are not taking for granted what it is they do. So mapping the processes, taking this negative or X-ray, if you will, allows us to understand and define where the barriers are, understand completely what people are doing in the warehouse, and not make assumptions. And I can tell you from my own experience, I can walk through a warehouse and ask the same question of 2 or 3 different people and possibly get 2 or 3 different answers as to how something is accomplished. So it's important we really understand what our processes are. So it helps us understand what the issues are in a warehouse, what specific areas are involved, how those problems become manifested, what the opportunities for improvement are, and by revealing those opportunities for improvement, ultimately it will lead us to some very creative solutions and allows us to understand how extensively you're going to need to improve your processes. So probably the most important fact that I can relate to you today, the most important fact, one fact I can tell you for sure. And in other presentations, sometimes I say, I'm so sure of these facts that I'll bet my firstborn child on it. And that is, in excess of 60% of the activities you perform in your warehouse, I guarantee it, add no value. It's waste. It's nothing the customer wants to pay for. And it would seem obvious that eliminating those wastes represent the greatest potential source of performance improvement in a distribution or warehouse environment, and surely provides a constraint or a roadblock to meeting any speed of flow objectives that you may develop. So in excess of 60% of the activities, it's been proven over and over again, add no value and can only be considered waste. And over the years, there's been a whole host of people that have come up with various waste attributes. Initially, there was something called the 7 wastes. Then it became the 8 wastes. Well, Howard Coleman's come up with 10 wastes. And actually, I'm thinking of adding a couple of more. And if you look at these quickly, and particularly the ones that are highlighted in red, probably the more common wastes. Things like over-processing. That is, you do more work than is needed and required to get the job done. Sometimes we have overly complicated flow. Sometimes we have, well, not sometimes, many times we have wasted space, either whether we're looking at the warehouse in the vertical plane or in the horizontal plane. Unnecessary motion is a big one. We're going to talk a lot about that one today. Unnecessary transport, which has to do with how you move product manually or in some automated fashion through the warehouse, as opposed to walking it through the warehouse. And another one that often gets kind of the short end of the stick many times in lean initiatives is a failure to use the knowledge of the workforce. Who knows better, really, than the people that are actually doing the job? They may not be able to express it well, but if we listen to them, they usually have some good ideas about how we can improve our processes. So these barriers, these wastes, become constraints in terms of our objective of consistent expected outcomes. That is, the outcome each time is the way we planned it, and we can do it 100% of the time, and we can do it 100% of the time correctly. Now, if I were to kind of aggregate all those wastes into more common headings or titles, if you will, I would tell you that most of the workflow constraints, as I've seen it over the years, have to do with poor space utilization, outdated storage methods, outdated picking and receiving methods, and of course, an underutilization or a lack of or underutilization of available technology. And these wastes have compounding effects. So we might think, well, you know, we do pretty good picking orders, and we do pretty good in terms of accuracy of checking our orders and loading them and delivering and so on. But the outcome at the end is less than the sum of all the individual components. So they do have compounding effects over time. So what does this all represent? Well, to me, this is the fun part, because this represents the opportunities for capacity improvement now and over the near term. So if we can do the right things and do things right, and you do have, as a company, those growth aspirations, then we have this great opportunity to avoid future costs as the company grows. Let's talk about strategy component number 2, and these are some observations I've made over the years that I think everyone should be thinking about or rethinking, as the case may be. And the first one is lack of conveyor systems. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later on because this is a major topic. Considering that as much as 70% of a person's time in the warehouse is spent actually walking. This isn't some theory. 70% of the time is spent walking. Now think about that. To me, that's an opportunity to increase the speed of flow. Storage by like products versus storage based on, let's say, some velocity analysis, some hits analysis. I see a lot of warehouses with 2 wide aisles. They haven't considered alternatives like narrow aisle storage. So when I go into a warehouse and I see aisles that are 11 or 12 feet wide, and more recently I saw aisles 18 to 20 feet wide, I have to ask, has anybody thought about narrow aisle storage? And we'll talk about that in a few moments. Why are people using other types of picking methods like batch, zone, or wave picking versus what's typically done today in majority of warehouses and distribution centers, and that is discrete picking, that is, we pick one order at a time. Picking stock transfers versus typical sales orders, they're different. Sales orders typically have less lines per order than a stock transfer does. It requires a different type of picking methodology. Flow rack utilization. I very rarely see those. I don't know if you're familiar. We'll show you some flow rack applications in a few moments. In fact, Mike will be able to speak to it. Flow rack applications. You just don't see that very often. And you'll see in a few minutes what some of the benefits might be. That old bugaboo, as I call it, is productivity measurement. Still very few companies that are reliably, on a consistent basis, measuring their productivity, measuring their cost of distribution through some type of performance metric. Space allocation, as how well a company is using the cube of the facility they have, regardless of whether you have high ceilings or low ceilings. Multiple stock keeping units in a storage location. I mean, that has got to be one of the primary culprits. And probably is one of the things that plays most havoc with productivity in the warehouse. One of the worst practices that continue to this day. And lastly, WMS or RF utilization. Companies do it, but unfortunately they incorporate some of the old ways of doing things and then wonder why they get the same results, that the results don't seem different than what their expectations are. In other words, there isn't sufficient return on investment. Strategy component number 3. And this is part of this, what I call this discovery and learning concept that we talked about earlier. It's very important that we have a picture of what the current facility looks like. Many companies don't have it, or it doesn't represent the current facility as it's laid out at that point in time. Because we want to have a blueprint, if you will, so we can begin to visualize what the future of this warehouse should look like. So it becomes it's basically a CAD drawing, computer-aided design drawing, and it becomes the basis for future design concept. Because ultimately, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and it allows us to visualize what a facility should look like. Oops. Sorry about that. So I'm going to ask Mike Wishmeyer to talk about a little bit about this, because this was one of the major steps in working with Mike and his team at Westminster at CPS Distributors in terms of developing this drawing, number one, from a current drawing, and then being able to utilize it to visualize different types of methods that we might be able to employ within the physical facility that they had. Mike?
Hi, everybody. I was asked by Howard to talk about a couple of topics within his presentation today, and this is one of them. The drawings themselves are obviously a tool only to help not only you as a decision maker, but also the folks that that utilize that space to make decisions about how you want to proceed. When Howard came into our warehouse, he informed us that based on his observations and the layout of our warehouse and the products we were moving through there, that he thought we could do the same amount of business out of 1/5 of the floor space that we had in the facility, which was a shocking number to us at the upper management level. So as part of the process to have Howard recommended the design, we went back and forth with those designs. The drawings themselves help us to communicate not only with the designer, but to go back and talk with our folks on the floor and show them what's suggested, get feedback, give everybody a visual for how this thing is going to work, and lets us ask tons of questions back to our experts as far as why we want to do the things we're doing, until it enabled us to eventually come to a conclusion that we wanted to lay it out in a certain way. We were going to take a lot of the recommendations originally proposed, tweak them a little bit, and then settle in on a design. And then finally, of course, that drawing is imperative when it comes to estimating costs for that implementation, and of course, actually laying the shelving out, planning your flow through the warehouse using bin location strategies. So we use that drawing quite a bit from the moment it was created until we went live with the system, with our new layout. So hopefully that covers, I guess, the reasons why we think this is an important component.
Thanks a lot, Mike. So, within this same strategy of systems design and being able to visualize, we're going to suggest throughout some what we think are some great bang for the buck places to start. And the series of pictures that you see here, 3 of them, I believe, are one here, one there. I hope you can see my cursor. And one here are our CPS. And it's the utilization of what we commonly call a high velocity pick zone. And a high velocity pick zone is established through an analysis of your order hits. And what we typically find, it varies give or take, is that often in excess of 50% of the hits come from maybe 500 to 600 stock keeping units. So think about that. You stock thousands of different products, but more than half of the hits of the orders contain one of those 500 or 600 products. So it seems pretty logical if we put those items together, regardless of what product group they fall into, that is, we don't necessarily keep them by vendor or by family of product, but they're all put into a very, very concentrated area called the high velocity pick zone, that we're going to, when we pick orders, a good portion of the time, we're going to be walking through a relatively small area compared to having to walk all over the warehouse randomly to find those particular products. And just going back to Mike's comment about being able to fit his inventory in Westminster into about 20% of the warehouse that he currently had, this was one of the major contributors to that. And we'll talk a little bit about the equipment. You can see there's a storage equipment that is commonly called flow rack that's used. There was a utilization of conveyor, which allows product to be moved down the line and then eventually pushed down towards the end. It doesn't mean a picker has to walk all the way down to the end. It can be pushed. Some of our implementations actually have a motorized conveyor at the end. So a picker only has to go so far after they make the last pick, and then the conveyor picks it up and moves it down to wherever it goes next, which would be typically into a packing or a checking area. So 3 of these pictures are from CPS. There's a couple here from a couple of other clients of ours that have done it, basically the same thing, but a little different permutation depending on their size and their needs and so on. This type of layout provides for a product overstock to be stocked above. It's tough to see it in these pictures, but to be stocked above these flow racks, and product is replenished by taking product from the top and then feeding it from the back of the flow rack to the front. So as product is pulled from the front, the next carton or the next group of products comes forward, almost like when you go to a supermarket and pull out a gallon of milk, the next gallon bottle drops down. So this is a methodology that has proven extremely valuable in terms of reducing the walking time of a product and allowing for increased product productivity or picking productivity. Here's just some additional pictures, some other clients, and again, it employs a lot of conveyor. And I got to tell you, for the life of me, I don't understand why wholesale distributors don't employ more conveyors. I mean, is it because we would prefer to see a picker walk all the way to a staging area from wherever the last pick was? So if you consider my early statement about 70% of the time a picker spends is in walking, then you can conclude through some basic mathematics that only about 2.5 hours per day is actually picking. I like to call time on task. So you can see the savings in time that can be accomplished by using a high velocity pick zone, employing flow rack. Other types of shelving, as you see in this one, there's the other side of the flow rack is just basic gray shelving that this company employed. But it allows for product to be concentrated, your top 500 or top 600 items, which is where most of your order velocity comes from. So I always like to say, say hello to Mr. Pareto. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Pareto's law. Probably one of the most common sense practical approaches to warehouse storage and picking methods that you might ever consider. Some of you may know it as the 80-20 rule, although it doesn't always come out that way. Sometimes it's 70-30. But this fellow Pareto, many years ago, he was an avid gardener. And he found that 20% of his pea pods in his garden yielded 80% of the peas that he picked. And that this pretty much held true across a wide swath of different types of occurrences. 20% of your customers might account for 80% of your sales in your company. Some companies, that's just the case. Or 80% of your problem children in your warehouse who are HR problems might come from 20% of your workforce. So as it turns out, and as they say, there's a great deal of similarity between pea pods and maybe your distribution business. So Mike, I'd like you to just to speak to this, if you will, including the some of the hits analysis that you did, and I think this particular segment of one of your reports kind of gives us a picture of the analysis that was done, and just kind of address this, if you will, Mike.
Sure. This was a really important component of the success of our project. It's funny to see this report up on screen. These kind of things rarely see the light of day. So this report, we took a strategy. Howard came in, made some observations about our warehouse. The space, capacity of the warehouse thing was one aspect of it. The other was that he observed one of our products that was picked a lot, went on almost every truck out our door, was located in the farthest, darkest corner of our warehouse, and we were asking our order pullers to make that trek back there many times a day, putting miles on their total walking for the day. So this topic goes directly to productivity in my mind, and in the minds of and in reality it's proven out to be true as well. So The concept is not very hard. You know, the things that you touch the most often, you put closest to the door in which they leave. Um, and that makes it so that the folks that are putting things away don't have to walk as far because they're always going to the same place, the assumption being that you receive those more often. Certainly true for those that are pulling orders. When you pull them more often, you walk less because you're walking to the area where you're pulling the most often, more often. Um, so we were able to take the design that we had and we got the top 1,200 products that we sell and move the most often into that small area of the warehouse, and it proved out to be pretty close to accurate of Howard's guess. About 80% of our products, are not the most important products in our mix. Doesn't mean we don't have to have them or that they're not important to our contractors or customers, but the things that we absolutely have to have day in and day out, always, 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 are the things that end up at the front of the velocity estimation. So we picked the spot that was probably the closest and the easiest to get to, and we made that our #1 location, and then the rest of the analysis flowed away from that location with the intention of having our order pullers most likely spending the vast majority of their time within 50 feet or 100 feet of the packing zone. And it's proven to be accurate. Now, there are always exceptions to the rule. You may have products that are too large or too heavy or misshapen or things like that won't necessarily fit into the flow rack. But the flow rack, that's where our most commonly picked products are in our flow rack. It self-feeds the front of the rack, so we don't have to dig around in the back. It holds a lot of products, so we don't have to go fetching it in alternative locations very often. A lot of benefits. I think the hardest part, for folks, and where most of the pushback comes from, is the idea that all the vendor product that you buy from a single vendor should be located in the same area so that you can find it. That's the mentality that we all have, and we certainly had it and still have it in certain aspects, because it makes sense, right? It makes perfect sense that you'd keep all of your copper fittings that you buy from the same guy all in the same place, and you'd keep we sell Rainbird sprinkler heads, so all of our Rainbird would be in the same place. That all makes perfect sense, from a human way of thinking. But if you give over to the machine thinking and the computer thinking, the systems that you have are bin located oriented, and the computer system, whether it be paper or handheld device driven, will direct you to find the product. And so leveraging that ability can make your folks vastly more efficient. We attribute this project to some serious efficiency gains. We were delivering about 5% probably of our product mix from our central distribution center to our branch locations in and around Denver, Colorado, and we were going once a week to each of those locations. After we did this project, we were able to go every day to all of those locations, well, most of them, and we didn't have to add any people to do that or equipment beyond the racking. So that what that tells us is that. Oh, and by the way, since that time, we're up to somewhere around 20% of the products that we sell are being distributed through the CDC and growing every day. So that effort has just, I guess, shown us the power of that of efficiency you can gain by eliminating some of those steps.
Okay, Mike. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's. I think that was very well said. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
The other, we talked earlier about my observations over the years when I go into a warehouse and I see 14, 12, 11, 12, 13, 14 foot aisles. I said recently about 18 to 20 foot aisles. Big surprise that was. And why we're not using more narrow aisle storage capability. Now, those large products, or as Mike called them, misshapen products, if you will, that won't fit into a typical flow rack application. Often, will still reside in some type of a pallet racking layout. What we try to encourage here is that we narrow those aisles as a way, particularly if you're cramped for space. There is an opportunity to narrow those aisles down to 3.5 to 4 feet. It does require some different picking equipment. You see a picture of it. They're narrow aisle stock pickers. They're pretty expensive, but you can lease them from your local materials handling guy. Might cost you $400 or $500 a month. You lease it for 4 or 5 years, then at the end of the lease, you pay them $1, and then you own it. So it's from our perspective, a great investment, particularly if you're cramped for space and you've got some high velocity items, and others for that matter, but primarily high velocity items that won't fit into a typical flow rack application because of their physical characteristics. So just another another look at some different ways of looking at things. I'd like to talk a little bit about picking methodologies because there are some great alternatives out there, and I would say that if you're still picking one order at a time, what's commonly called discrete picking, then I'm going to suggest you're still behind the 8 ball. So let me try to define some of these for you because some of these terms tend to get conflated. But the important thing here to remember is that the choices you make really have to do, the choices you make between these various methods really have to do with the imperative of what our objective is, and that is minimizing waste, increasing speed of flow, reducing the walk time, reducing the product handling, reducing the double and triple touches of product. So let's talk about discrete picking, which is probably what you commonly do, what most companies are still doing. And with discrete picking, you get a piece of paper and you start picking orders one at a time. It's typically picked off some type of static shelving or maybe pallet racks. People are pushing carts up and down aisles. Maybe they're using a motorized pallet jack or a lift truck or something like that. Maybe, just maybe, some of the fastest moving items are at the start of the pick route. It's a deal for a paper-based picking operation, if that's still where you are. But I can tell you, picking one order at a time is still the least efficient. One time was the only way to do it, but right now it's the least efficient way of picking an order. And then we have batch picking. And here we can pick more than one order at a time. That is, we can pick multiple orders that have some of the same SKUs on it. And if you think back to that high velocity pick zone, you can see some of the advantages of being able to go to one area, that high velocity pick area, and being able to pick out of that zone, if you will, the same item for different customers. And it does require some process change. You have to have some carts and some totes where you can pick multiple orders simultaneously. It's kind of hairy to do it in the paper mode because typically it requires some additional verification to make sure people aren't mixing orders one on top of the other. But in an RF environment where each tote has its own license plate and you're scanning, picking 10 pieces a shelf and then putting 2 each into 5 different totes. And if you're scanning that, you get a lot more accuracy than you would if you were doing this in a paper mode. It does require you to wait for some accumulation of orders to occur so you can maximize the number of batch picking you're going to do. Some people, for some reason still perceive that as being inconsistent with their delivery commitments. Most of the time we can overcome that mental hurdle. And then we have zone picking. Zone picking is where we pick an order from every picker picks an order from an assigned zone that they've been assigned to. And they only pick those SKUs within their own zone. Now, because every zone may have different products with different physical characteristics in them, some pickers are going to be able to pick faster than others. It takes maybe a lot longer to pick pipe than it does that copper fitting that Mike was mentioning earlier. So it is limited by the slowest picker or the pick capacity of each zone. But particularly if you have a warehouse management system, and RF handheld devices, you can mitigate that through appropriate storage media and equipment, maybe some different changes in your manpower planning, and how you consolidate those products that are coming from different directions in your warehouse. It can be done. Warehouse management system capability today can provide us the opportunity to consolidate orders that are picked from different zones. It's a big productivity enhancer. Wave picking is really something. This is the one I can really get excited about. It's kind of a combination of zone and batch picking. And I find, and most of my clients find, that it's a great method if you have your own delivery routes or have specific carrier or time of day pickup commitments. For instance, they'll pick orders in waves if for all UPS shipments or for all FedEx shipments, or they'll pick one delivery truck at a time, because some of those delivery trucks have to leave the building at different times during the day, or different times at night, or different times in the morning to get to their assigned geographical delivery point. And the other critical thing that wave picking has allowed here and has got people thinking differently about is that many of these companies that employ wave picking typically begin to move to a multi-shift or late shift operation. Because wave picking, as batch picking does, it requires you accumulate orders throughout the day. And to me, that's the beauty of building. Really what you're building here is kind of a universe of shippable orders. It's sitting up there in the computer system. And then at the appropriate times when you want to release those waves, release truck number 1, release truck number 2, drop all the orders for UPS or drop all the orders for FedEx or whoever the carrier happens to be, you can begin, or the system, the WMS system, can sort them by zone and then batch within those zones. So as I mentioned, wave picking, because of the extreme productivity potential, it has motivated many companies to move to this staggered late shift or multi-shift operation, where they drop a wave and they begin to pick those orders for the orders that are contained within that particular wave. What do they end up with? Well, they end up with 2 different types of operations. They have a day shift, primarily a day shift, which is comprised mostly of receiving, put away of what was received, bin replenishment of product, particularly in the high velocity pick zone where they're using the flow rack. Maybe during the day they're doing some cycle counting. Cycle counting becomes a lot easier because there isn't a lot of competition at this point for equipment or other people trying to pick orders. During the day they will pick maybe counter orders, will calls or customer pickups, emergency orders that come in. But the majority of the picking is done late in the day, or maybe with some of my clients, late into the evening. And it's done in literally a fraction of the time, because the WMS now is organizing the order, the dropping of those orders at the appropriate time based on some rules, based on geographical territory, based on method of delivery. So, Mike, I'm going to ask you one more time to kind of chime in here and update us as to what you're doing as far as your picking methods are concerned. I have to admit, Mike and I haven't talked recently about whether he's gravitating to a different way or not. So I'll be hearing this for the first time also. But if I remember correctly, Mike, you were still, some months ago, you were still picking one order at a time. Is that correct?
That's correct, and that's still where we are for the most part. So I think a lot of us, as wholesalers, at least in our business, we have a lot of outdoor product and a lot of indoor product, and by default we zone pick. We have guys in the yard that pull all the yard product, and guys inside the building that pull all the inside product, and then they get married up when we load the truck. So I think even on paper, which is, we're still on a paper-based system, we've figured out ways to deal with zone picking. We have not moved to a wave model. We certainly haven't moved to a multi or batch picking model as of yet. But one of the things that we have learned over the course of this effort in the last 18 months or so is that the value of a warehouse management system in this process is how we take this to the next level, and the wave picking and the batch picking kind of come along with those technologies, as I see it. It doesn't mean you couldn't figure out a way to do it another way, but I think they certainly make them much more feasible.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
So, I think you'll agree that it's necessary, as you consider some of the things that you've heard today, that it's going to be necessary to develop a strategy. Some of that is understanding what some of your data is, and a good example, and how data can help you. And a good example of that is what we talked about and what Mike described when he was doing the hits analysis for what should be contained in his high velocity pick zone, as well as what other products should be maybe contained in different areas of the warehouse. We talked about the importance, and Mike added to this, the importance of process design in terms of being able to visualize and being able to put on a piece of paper in a blueprint form, if you will, what you want this flow to be, and how we were able to take advantage of a drawing or a layout, if you will. Obviously, understanding these concepts that we talked about, whether it's Pareto or whether it's the different picking methods or whether it's a different storage methods. There's a lot out there that can be employed that might be what it is you're doing now. And then obviously it does require that you re-engineer some of these processes to use if you really want to get the return on investment that you would expect. But I can tell you from our own experience, and it varies from company to company, but for the most part, you can expect a return on investment of around 15 to 30% in reduction of cost and increase in productivity. And often that can be done within approximately a 6-month period. So I'm not far off when I say that. It varies by company, all depending on how much they've bitten off the change and so on. And every company does it a little bit different in terms of what they're comfortable in employing all at one time. But there is huge opportunity here for cost savings and productivity increases. One area I just want to talk about very briefly, we could spend probably an hour on this, is the last strategy component, and that has to do with productivity measurement. We haven't spent a lot of time in this, but I guess I would start off by saying that I bet everyone out there in the audience, and I know I do, know what their blood pressure reading is, and you know what your cholesterol level is, right? Well, when I ask the question, typically when I go into a warehouse about what your cost per order is and what your cost per line shipped is, I tend to get a lot of eyes glazed over. So strategy number 4, productivity measurement, really asks us to begin to balance some business analytics with what is often, I find, a reliance on anecdotal information and sometimes of questionable objectivity. So there are a lot of different measures out there. I'd be happy to send you a list of those as what people use. I'm not suggesting you have to use all 20 of them, but there are some basic measurements out there that can allow you to, number one, establish a baseline measurement as to where you are now. So as you begin to make some of the improvements along the lines of what we've discussed today, you can begin to see where it is or where you maybe have not got the productivity improvement that you may have expected, because there's got to be an ROI here. So, and the only way to measure that is to have some solid, very quantitative performance measurements. So I hope today, in terms of the takeaways that you hopefully are leaving with today, that you've have more of appreciation for the lean thinking philosophy, if you will, in terms of the value of identifying and driving out waste out of your organization. Just by being here today, I think most of you I would say are open to change, and you're open to doing things differently. Number 3, get that HIT velocity list ready. I mean, that's the simplest thing you can do, and I think Mike emphasized that it's one of the most simplest things you can do in terms of authenticating what it is what items appear most in what order on various orders, and then being able to locate those products, slot those products as they call it, in your warehouse in an appropriate area. The importance of incorporating new warehouse design concepts that we talked about today, adopting new picking and storage methods, whether it's flow rack or narrow aisle storage, or whether it's batch or zone or wave picking, and then finally measuring your own performance in terms of where you are right now as a baseline, and then as you make these improvements, hopefully see what the improvements are, because again, there has to be an ROI. So as I conclude, I just would like to ask a simple question. I've had a lot of questions today, I guess, that I've been throwing out there, but maybe I would best call it my call to action, and that is, what is it that you want your new reality to be in terms of your distribution operations cost structure? Putting your warehouse into the financial arena so you can be a profit center, a contributor to profits. How is it that you're going to leverage what it is that needs to get done to support this speed of flow concept in your distribution operations? Because you need to consider that distribution centers and warehouses are no longer just a cost of doing business. They're not a necessary evil, as most people used to call them years ago, but in fact can be a strategic asset and a major component of your go-to-business strategy. With that, I'd like to thank you very much for your time. I think we actually got within the time that was allowed, just a few minutes late. Again, I'd like to thank the folks at Virtual Rain for asking me to do this today. And if anyone has any questions, there's a picture of my business card there. Please feel free to contact me or email me, call me. There's no obligation. There's no cost for a telephone call. I would like to offer you also, if you email me, there's a white paper I have available. It's called your Distribution Center in Warehouse Operations, Cost Center, or Profit Center, that speaks to many of the things that we were discussing today, but only in written form. Be happy to send that along to you if you contact me. Okay. I just do want to mention the folks at Virtual Rain have asked me to do 2 other webinars this year. The next one that's coming up is going to be about central distribution, and it's going to be called The Pros and Cons of Central Distribution. That is a hub and spoke arrangement versus shipping from your vendor direct to a branch. There are some considerations that need to be leveraged there to see what the best way is to do that. A lot of people ask me that, and I thought it might be a good topic to present to this group. That's going to occur sometime in May. I'm sure you'll be getting a notification from Virtual Rain. And then in August, there's another one called Managing the Inventory and Service Level Drivers, plus some other things that probably drive you crazy. So with that, I'd like to again thank you very much, and I guess we're open for questions at this point.
Okay, Howard, looks like you have a question here from Brad. He is wondering, do high-velocity pick zones work with a hybrid layout warehouse where orders could be pulled by customers shopping or employees picking?
When you say just define the word hybrid from me again, please.
It says here, orders could be pulled by customers shopping or employees picking.
Customers shopping, that would normally be in the counter area, would it not?
Let me just unmute Brad and maybe he can give us a little more insight.
Okay, very good. Yep.
Okay, Brad, you should be unmuted. You can ask your question. Oh, he doesn't.
Hi, Brad. How you doing?
He says he doesn't have a mic.
Oh, okay. Well, in my experience and observations, when wholesale distributors have had custom options where the customer can pick it, typically called like do-it-yourself options. Typically, that product is usually in an area that's part of a counter operation where there's a point of sale display, and customers are picking products and bringing it to the counter to be combined with other stuff that's being picked from the warehouse. As far as if his question is alluding to having customers walk through the warehouse, that's something I usually frown upon.
This is Mike. We set our branch locations up in the way that Brad's described, and I would say, well, from a velocity standpoint, probably not super effective because, again, it's the human that's trying to organize the store from a usability standpoint rather than the computer, and so likely you're going to organize things by like object or brand or something of that nature would be my thought.
Okay. We have another one?
It's not looking like it, and Brad did say that makes sense, and thanks for your answer.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Mike. I appreciate you getting me out of that one.
But yeah, it's not looking like there's any more questions.
Okay, well, I hope, again, I thank you all very much for attending. I hope it was valuable, and again, anybody have any questions, feel free to call me or get in contact me with whatever way you feel best, more comfortable. There's no obligation and there's no cost to it. I love to talk about these things with people, so that's kind of my motivator.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Howard, and thanks everybody for joining us.
Okay, and Jordan, this presentation is going to be available to these folks if they want to share it with other people?
Yes, it has been recorded, and we will get it to everybody. They can review it, they can share it, and all of that. So yeah, definitely.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mike, thanks again for your input.
Sure thing.
Take care. Have a great day.
I know.